the 5th African Philanthropy Conference, the next frontiers of African philanthropy.
So the next session is a plenary session, and Prof. Moyo alluded to it earlier by saying that CAPSI is currently implementing a project aimed at, understanding the contribution of the non-profit sectors to African economies, but with a specific focus on youth, employment, and dignified and fulfilling work for the African youth. So this project is it's a collaborative project that is implemented by CAPSI's partners across 17 countries in the continent. And some of these partners are here just to have a bit of conversation to know where the project is, the experience that they have already with the project, and issues related to, job creation in the continent generally, especially for the young ones. So at this juncture, I would like to welcome our country partners. Number one is Professor Okech, Moses Okech from Makerere University, is the one helping us to implement the project in Uganda. Prof. Okech, please, welcome to the dais. In Ethiopia, our project is spearheaded by Professor Tesfaye Zeleke from University of Addis Ababa. Prof, please, welcome to the dais. In Zambia, our country partner is Dr. Nalukui Milapo. Doc, I believe you're in the room. Please welcome to the dais. Just take a seat. Just take a seat. While in Zimbabwe, the project is implemented by SIVIO Institute. Dr. Tendai Murisa, please welcome. And in Egypt, our country partner is Professor Awni, who is from the American University of Cairo. Prof, please welcome to the dais. Yeah, so as you come to the stage, I'll just ask you probably to introduce yourself in your own way, I may have not been able to introduce you fully or well. I'll start with you, Prof. I don't know whether there is a mic there, or you can use this.
Good morning, all. My name is Tesfaye Zeleke. I'm working for Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. Currently, I'm serving as the Dean of College of Development Studies. Addis Ababa, the College of Development Studies is one of the 10 colleges in Addis Ababa University. I'm happy to be here and to share on CAPSI project.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Moses Okech. I lecture at Makerere University in Uganda. We have a multidisciplinary department called Department of Extension and Innovation Studies, and that is the space where the CAPSI research project is currently domiciled. I'm very happy to be here. First of all, to be in Zimbabwe for the first time, but more importantly, to meet the CAPSI stakeholders in your respective capacities. Thank you.
I think you can use the mic there. I think it's working now. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you all delegates. My name is Nalukui Milapo. My substantive position is with the University of Zambia, where I serve as head of the governance program and research fellow on the governance research program. So within the University of Zambia, there's a unit that we call the Institute of Economic and Social Research. It's a multidisciplinary research unit of the university, and that's where I serve. I think that's sufficient for now, right?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Awni. I'm with the American University in Cairo Business School. I teach there supply chain operations management. In addition to that, I also direct a center. It's called the Gerhardt Center for Philanthropy, Civic Engagement, and Responsible Business. Thank you.
Good morning, and welcome to Zimbabwe. We are your de facto hosts, Sialamuyela. All of you, you're welcome. My name is Tendai. I'm with SIVIO Institute. We are based in Harare, Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, like I indicated earlier, we are generally going to be talking about the landscape of employment landscape in Africa, and particularly what the non-profit sector does in that process, with a particular focus to the youth. And our project is very intentional in that we are looking for the youth in the fringes, the youth that are typically normally neglected by the, the whole sectors that provide employment opportunities to the populations. So I'll start just by asking Prof. Tesfaye just to give us a bit of the landscape, how the employment in Ethiopia is, especially with the, we know that unemployment exists, but what type of jobs do the non-profit sector currently provide, especially to the young people?
Thank you very much, Professor Wycliffe. Regarding the unemployment situations in Ethiopia, well, I would like to give you a sort of backdrop on the situation of the youth. Generally speaking, the Ethiopian population is a young population, where nearly 70% of the population constitutes the youth. Nearly 70%, you can imagine, between 0 to 14 and between 15 to 15 to 29. Overall, the recent statistics shows that some 30% of the youth population has been unemployed, and the job available in the market has been also challenging because of the mismatch between the skills that are being acquired in the universities and the jobs that are available. And in fact, we know that there are a lot of unemployment categories, and we can see there is a prevailing structural unemployment problems when the labor market is unable to accommodate and absorb the users that are coming out of the universities, the schools, and the like. And in fact, there has been a lot of efforts by the government over the last few decades, the last 2 decades. There has been a lot of initiatives by the NGO sector, by the philanthropic sector, in terms of really creating dignified and fulfilling employment. But as speakers were saying earlier, there is a long way again to meet the demands of the users that are coming out of the university. So there has been a very big project in terms of really connecting the users with the agricultural sector, the users in the service sector, the users in other development sectors. But as I said earlier, there has been a lot of challenges, especially in terms of access to land, in terms of access to credit, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the quality of education that basically connects the users with the type of the jobs that are available in the market. So the population is growing, and now we are almost approaching at 120 million. Out of this, as I mentioned earlier, nearly some 70% is a young population, and 26 to 30% is unemployed. And you can imagine the challenge and the landscape, how it is really pressing on the socio-economic situations of the country, on the political dimensions of the country. So this is one of the most important issues in Ethiopia.
Thank you so much, Prof. Moving forward, I believe the demographics in Africa, I mean, the characteristics are almost the same. When we talk about the youth demography in Ethiopia and probably in Uganda it's the same. So Prof, I would like to ask you, in terms of this project, what do you think is sort of the impact and the relevance, especially given the processes and the activities and programs that you have in Makerere?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that very relevant question. So when I look at the CAPSI research agenda right now, I see this as something that is really relevant, not just for the youth in Uganda, but also in terms of the shaping of the national economic outlook. We are talking about youth unemployment here, and this is something that also ranks very strongly with a national priority. But we are also looking at the idea of dignified and fulfilling work. Now, if you look at our national employment data and statistics, usually we talk about the number of youth in employment. And rarely do we actually talk about the quality of employment that the youth are in. You see, statistically, we simply collect information about the youth who are engaged in one form of entrepreneurial activity or the other, or the youth who are actually in formal employment. Now, the situation in Uganda has been shifting for the last few years in that, one, we see so many youth actually getting into what we call informal employment or the non-formal sector. Sometimes this shift is a positive thing, we could say, because if youth are getting into employment, that is good. But we should also see that there's a kind of precarity that is happening here. So in precarious environments, youth will find their own way, you know. Now, whether what they're doing actually exploits their potentials to the maximum is another conversation altogether. So you have so many youth who are actually underemployed who get into the national statistics of employed persons. I think that is something that this research project should really bring out. How fulfilling or how dignified is the kind of employment that young people are in. The other bit and the other conversation that this research will actually bring out is the issue of shifting priorities in terms of employment areas that resonate with the nature of our national economies in Africa. If you ask most of us in this room probably, what is the leading economic sector in the countries, people will talk about agriculture. But how many youth have actually remained gainfully employed in the field of agriculture? I think that is the kind of conversation we should have. We have what I would call an emerging crisis, especially in the rural areas, where you find that many young people are now running away from agriculture and they are going to the service industry. In East Africa, we have a thriving sector called these motorcycle taxis. I don't know how you call them in your respective countries. In Uganda, they are called boda boda. You know, like, so you get so many able-bodied young people leaving the rural areas where they used to contribute gainfully to agriculture and going to ride motorcycles in the urban areas. Now, we need to have this conversation. Is that the best use of their labor? And you find it's the elderly people who are now left, you know, to manage, you know, the agricultural activities in the community. So no wonder food production output is going down, but employment figures are going up. So how relevant is this kind of increased youth employment and employability in certain areas helping our economies? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Dr. Nalukui, as we proceed with the implementation of the project and the experience that you've gained in the process up to where we are, could you paint us a picture in Zambia? Now, I am saying, as we continue with the implementation of the project, the experience you've gained, since the beginning of the project, paint us a picture, like, does the project stand to inform national youth employment policies, something like this?
Thank you very much for that particular question. Just to maybe from the inception say that the issue of youth unemployment, it's a hot issue in my country. I think when you look at what has happened politically and also economically, starting from, particularly from the 1990s, you'll find that my country hasn't been strong economically because of course, we depend, there's a lot of dependence on copper. And so, so there's a lot of dependence on copper. And so, and also 1991, when we opened up for democratic reforms, that's the time when you saw that the non-profit sector really came in. And so there's been an interest in terms of young people participating in the non-profit sector, what we call basically civil society. So in terms of this particular project, I think it will inform policy, one in terms of, first and foremost, actually just the regulatory framework. Because you find that when it comes to civil society, really, it's loose, okay? Of course, there's registration in terms of 3 anchoring institutions where the civil society is registered. I think it would be important to coordinate the 3 institutions, because then you don't even know where the data is sitting when you want to come up with a list for, say, who's operating where in terms of civil society. I think it would be important to align the institutions that are registering the civil society organizations. And not only that, I think this particular intervention will also allow for the country, because I think civil society has done so much in the absence of what we expect even from government itself or even from the private sector, because the model that we adopted where we thought that things would trickle down hasn't worked. And so it will allow for us to understand the spread of civil society when it comes, the geographical spread in terms of what civil society is doing to uplift the people. Because ultimately you find that when it comes to the rural areas, you actually find that the civil society is doing a lot in terms of supporting young people in the agricultural sector and so on. And other than that, I think that the literature review that has been done also highlights the point that when it comes to the gender relations, you find that there are more young men that are doing work in civil society than women. So it'd be important to also balance that. But other than that, also the literature that, because we're at the very beginning of the project, we also find that there's a lot of volunteerism that goes on, okay? So when we're talking about decent work and so on, for how long should somebody volunteer? Because you find these young people utilizing their time, utilizing their skills and so on in this particular capacity for so long. So at what point do you say, no, this is enough? And so I think that we're very excited as a country to be anchoring this particular project, but also as the university itself, because it ties in very well with the other works that we've been doing, particularly with the World Bank. Recently I was in the field to undertake a study for the World Bank, which is almost similar to this, except we're looking at other dynamics, but it was work and young people in relation to the private sector and so on. So it ties very well with our daily work within the university and within the institute that I operate from. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So, Prof. Ali, one of the components or particular pillars of the project is to zero in on the subsectors, the subsectors that are important in terms of providing jobs, decent work, dignified, fulfilling work for the youth. Could you, in your experience in Egypt and as we continue to implement the project, what are the most, the significant subsectors within the non-profit sector that stands to benefit the youth?
That's a very hard question, given the fact you're talking about a country that's going through tremendous devaluation of currency, and the informal sector is up to 40, 50, maybe even 60% of the whole pie. I mean, this is exactly what Moses was saying. You have youth doing whatever it takes just to get money, and they get money better than formal jobs by doing those kind of things. Now, there is a structural problem. There is an ecosystem problem. When I have 60% informal sector, the reason this is the case is because it is hard to do formality because of the easiness of doing business. This is an ecosystem issue, right? And it's a government issue. Now, in Egypt specifically, people will try to sort of go for easy things, just quick fixes, because again, a government mandate, he wants to show something in 2-3 years. Even a civil society or a donor organization wants to show something in 2-3 years. So they'll go for a quick wins that does not guarantee on the long run that can actually give you issues. I'll give you a simple example, universities, for example. I bet you 60-70% of graduates from universities do not work, are not qualified for the job market. There is a recent study interesting in India, and they talk that 45% of graduates of Indian universities do not qualify for jobs. And they insist to go for things that does not make sense. You don't need them. And they ignore, for example, technical vocational education. And it's cultural, by the way. It's cultural because we tend to think higher of a doctor, of an engineer, of a university graduate, not of a technician, which is, by the way, very different in Germany, for example. The technical university or technical, this is what we need. We need those kind of things. We need people who can actually talk technical, vocational. Now, when you talk about the civil society in Egypt, it is very much, I would say, nationalized. I don't know if that's proper to answer it right now, to say it right now. It's very nationalized. The government recognized way back that the money in general, giving philanthropy, could be a source of political disruption. So they control it. Most of the funds coming for education, for capacity building, for youth, for jobs, actually has to go through the government, where government decides what to do. And I think this is probably across Africa in different ways, in different flavors. And maybe we're not focusing on the right thing. Maybe we're focusing too much. I'll give you an analogy, and I hope we're focusing too much in getting an athlete who can play a special sport. And what is a good sport is going to change, instead of focusing on producing a good athlete who can play any game. I'm talking about youth change agents, people who could actually change, could actually go and change things. And they can fend for themselves. Even in literature about entrepreneurship, there is a change nowadays, and they talk about freelancing, they talk about teaching youth self-sustenance, how to take care of yourself, not the specifics of a specific job. This is in a parlance of modeling. This is overfitting. Overfitting is bad. But anyway, I hope I've answered some of your questions, but I know I've diverted, but that's a bad habit of mine.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Tendai, you have the benefit of having been at the inception of when the story started, but at the same time, you also have the benefit of having, having reviewed the literature, into details. I think it would be okay for you to just give us the whole picture and the experience with the project, and also the institutional alignment, because there is a reason why your institution was, was among the ones favored to implement this project in Zimbabwe.
Thank you so much, Wycliffe. I heard somebody call you professor. Maybe it's coming. Yeah.
Hopefully.
So this is a very important study, and there are questions that we have to sort of think at the background. I occupy two positions. On the one hand, as a researcher interested in this research, but also as somebody who has been involved in setting up a nonprofit, as somebody who sits on boards of nonprofits, beginning to deal with these questions. Because the question that we're asking is, our specific question is, what kind of jobs do nonprofits sort of produce for the youths in terms of dignified, etc.? So in other words, you may connect with the work of Babington and others of 2013, where the question was asked, do NGOs make a difference, or do nonprofits make a difference? So that's very important. And for us, it's a case study of Zimbabwe. And in Zimbabwe, those we've done history say the first NGO in Zimbabwe was set up in 1950. So that means we're looking at 74 years. What have NGOs done when you're looking at that? So, but the first thing that we did as we're carrying out this, our desktop, was to say, what are these NGOs? Who are these NGOs? When we talk about nonprofits, what are we talking about? So we came up with delimitations. There are international NGOs working in our countries. There are national NGOs that work across the country, but they tend to be local. They are national in terms of their registration and their origin. Then there are local NGOs. Then there are community-based nonprofits. So the study does not limit to say we're only focusing on international NGOs or international nonprofits, but we're beginning to try to understand what kind of jobs do these different categories of nonprofits, what do they produce? And so before you just go into those categories, is also to understand the different functions of these organizations. Some are into service delivery, some are subcontractors of INGOs. INGOs come and they actually contract local NGOs as last mile service providers. Others are into intermediary services, many organizations in this room. Others are into knowledge production. Others are into what we call defensive mechanisms. Human rights organizations, these are lawyers organizations, advocacy focused organizations. So this is just a sort of a schematic framework that we've done before going into the field, because fieldwork is yet to start. Then you're interested also in how are they funded, yeah? So we understand that, so we're looking at the quality of funding and the quantity of funding. Then you set aside those questions and you go to the labor questions to say, traditionally when we understood the economy, the challenge of job creation was never the mandate of NGOs or nonprofits. We always used it around the firm, the for-profit firm. So it's a bit of an oddity that we find ourselves talking about nonprofits creating jobs. Non-profits creating jobs, because they do not have, so normally profit itself was associated with some form of labor that takes place so that you can have a profit. But here we have non-profits that are not established. There are very few organizations that will say, when we established ourselves, we wanted to create jobs. Very few non-profits would say that. So that's a very important sort of demarcation to understand that. So creation of jobs is incidental to their work. So it's not something that they set out to say, oh, we are going to create this kind of jobs, but it's incidental to their work. So when you understand that, but it's also the same for the for-profit sector. The for-profit sector, according to the shareholders, all they want is shareholder value, which is their profit. So also the quality of jobs is incidental. So there's that mediation to say, when you're looking at labor economics, it's something that no one wakes up and say, I'm going to create 1,000 jobs. Somebody says, I'm going to make $1 million. Somebody says, I'm going to save the world. I'm going to contribute towards the eradication of HIV/AIDS. But in the process, you're going to employ people. So that's very important. Then we also, another demarcation that we did was around target groups. NGOs focused on the youths, NGOs focused on women, disabilities, men, and rural and others. So once you have done that as your brief overview of trying to understand, you then look at, I think our entry point then was to begin to say, how sustainable are they? Because what we did, and I had the opportunity to brainstorm this with Prince yesterday, Mudau, around the creation of what you may call itinerant jobs. Because most of our findings are that many NGOs are project-based. Their funding is project-based. Funding can be 6 months, can be a year. There are very few organizations that have multi-year grants. But we find those with multi-year grants in the service delivery sector. Those who are subcontractors, say, of USAID, etc., that are given 5-year grants to work maybe on HIV/AIDS, girl-child education, etc. But even them, they're 5 years, there's no guarantee that that funding will be renewed. So you're looking at the quality of jobs that they create. They're normally short-term, and they're contract-based, and also you may call them itinerant. We use this term itinerant in the sense that when you look at a local district, like where Prince was talking about, Beitbridge, where organizations are going to come and do something to say, we want to do something about commercial sex work, or going to do something about girl-child education, etc. What you find, an organization may get 3 years of funding, but when that 3-year funding goes, it does not mean that the project has ended. What it means is the donor has looked for another organization. So you find organizations in Zimbabwe here, World Vision, CARE, IRC, etc., competing for those. So 3 years, first 3 year, World Vision may win that grant, and they may run that project. But in the next 3-year cycle, it may be won by another organization. So the itinerant comes in this sense. When you secure the contract, you don't have the workers. But what we then do now is you get those ones who are in that other organization doing more or less the same work. So we called it itinerant. So you have to understand that it's short term, but there are certain people who have actually managed to negotiate their livelihoods, moving from one organization to the other. And it's a very important sort of finding. And also, as we're looking at employment creation, we say that there's direct beneficiaries, and then there are indirect beneficiaries. I've spoken so far to around direct beneficiaries. So our interest now is to begin to say, how do we delineate to understand of the direct beneficiaries? How many of those beneficiaries will say they're employed in the NGO sector? How many are actually youths? Yeah, we begin to look at that to say, so you go through those different organizations, and you begin to see that. In Zimbabwe, we're finding that many of the labor statistics that we have, NGO sector as a whole is responsible for employment creation around 4%. And of that 4%, we're finding that 20% are youths. Yeah, we're trying now to begin to understand how long-term, how short-term those contracts are, and how dignified those jobs are. That requires field work for us to understand. But then there's also the issue around indirect employment creation, which is something that I think, and if you were really to be fair to NGOs, this is where they are more active through their training, vocational training, and also if you do what we call the life cycle analysis of a project. This is a new method that we are borrowing from climate change, where they're trying to understand carbon contribution by doing life cycle analysis of a product. We are doing life cycle analysis of a project to say, if one organization gets X amount of money, when you try to understand in the lifespan of that project, how many jobs were actually created for the youths. Some of them temporary, some of them could be that this is a service delivery. It's given that we're in Southern Africa, we're dealing with El Nino, there's a lot of relief exercises going on. This could be how many youths were employed on a day when there was a truck delivering food. We see these images in Gaza and everything when food is being... So there's actually a creation of a transaction where youths come to unload sacks of bags so that they can feed, etc. So those short-term contracts are difficult to measure. I can see that you're about to warn me about time. Then, so what are the challenges for all of us who are going to be studying this? Not only in Zimbabwe, the real challenge is around the accurate list of NGO databases. Do we have databases of NGOs? Because in Zimbabwe, the challenge we've had up until now is there have been many routes or many routes to establishing an NGO. You could establish as a trust, as a PVO, but the government of this country is trying to put all those under what you call private voluntary organizations. So maybe I can stop here so that if there's a second round, I can build upon it.
Yeah, very interesting. And as you can see, colleagues, we may not exhaustively exhaust what the discussion here is. But we are going to be here hopefully for the next 5 days, or for those who are not going to extend to the next 2 days, we can still explore and have this conversation into details. I would have loved to continue to dissect this conversation, but unfortunately time has become a factor here. But the conversation continues, colleagues. I want to thank you so much for availing yourself and accepting to have this conversation. So thank you so much. Yeah, so we are moving into the break. We're very careful about time. I hope we all know where our breakaway sessions or the parallel sessions are. If you are a presenter, it would be good to be in the room at least 10 minutes too, so that we do the those transition issues, making sure that your presentation is well loaded in the computers. In each and every room, there's going to be a computer that is connected to the projector. So just ensure that your presentations are there. Most of you have sent them to me, and I'm also working with a colleague just to ensure that what you sent is what is there. So just a final check of quality. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best.